finger thing again.
Storytelling in Rome. Learn more right after this.
Seven 7,000 high school students drop out every school day. That's a line of desks more than 4 miles long. We can keep students in school. Visit boostup.org and take the first step.
Practically use it. That's what we just changing.
Welcome to Community Watch. Greg,
Doc,
how are you?
I'm here.
Are you? Well, I'm glad. We're going to talk about storytelling today.
Which I know nothing about.
Well, that's not really true, because you are one of the great storytellers.
I don't know how to take that.
Well, I'm sure a lot of people that know you will agree with me.
Oh, okay.
But there is a group in town that tells stories in a performance context, and we'll talk with one of their members today.
It's like a lost art, an old art. You just
It's
don't.
very old. I mean, that's what we had before anything was written down.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I can just remember in school and as a kid, we would have storytellers come, and that was the big thing, and how they could just captivate a whole room full of kids, just by telling stories.
Yeah.
There's an art to it,
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to learn, kind of where it's at now.
Well, Bob Harris is going to be our guest, and we'll have him out after this break. And I know it will be a really interesting show today. So I want everyone to stay with us, and we'll be right back with our guest after this.
If you drive buzzed, it could cost you around $10,000. You'll face major legal fees, major fines, and steep insurance penalties. You could lose everything. Nothing kills a buzz like getting pulled over for buzz driving, because buzz driving is drunk driving.
Welcome back to Community Watch. We're very happy to have with us today Bob Harris. Welcome.
Glad to be here.
And remind me again, what is the name of the storytelling group?
The group we have active here in Rome is the Ridge and Valley Tellers. And we chose that basically because there are 5 regions of Georgia, and we're trying to, Rome happens to be and Floyd County happens to be in the Ridge and Valley region, if you remember your 8th grade Georgia studies. Yes, I'm glad you remember that. But we're trying to bring in people who tell stories, who are interested in hearing stories or learning about how to do it in this area, not just Rome, not just Floyd County, but surrounding counties, all that kind of border us. That's why we call ourselves the Ridge and Valley Tellers. This was kind of spearheaded by Terrell Shaw, and I think inspired by Debbie Brown. And they're the group that I had been with before, the Seven Hill Tellers, Jane Cunningham and Mary Lana Kirk, and of course Debbie Brown and such. We are very actively involved in this group too, because we think this is something vital that we can contribute to the area.
Now, the Ridge and Valley group is fairly new.
Correct, and we're open to anybody. We try to meet once a month, and it's open to anybody who wants to come tell stories, or if you just want to hear stories or learn something about what we're trying to do. It's just, we're there.
But I know that you have been involved in storytelling for quite a while.
Oh yes, yes. I can actually blame it all on 2 ladies. Sue Hamler Lee, when she was a librarian in Taylorsville, We lived across the street from each other, and she found out I collect armor, swords, and stuff like that, and I like King Arthur. And so she invited me to her school to come talk about King Arthur and bring a few swords. And I'll be honest with you, the first time I went out there, after 3.5 hours, she said, the kids, I've got to stop them and get them back to their class. And the other one was Jane Cunningham. I heard her tell stories about growing up, and I just became infatuated with what she did and how she tells me as Miss Jane stories. And but I began to think about stuff that had happened to me as a child. I started telling stories, basically King Arthur stories, and the other group I would tell were Winnie the Pooh stories. As a young man, or a young child, let's say, I have hemophilia. I'm a free bleeder. And the many nights I would be up with a bad knee or a bad ankle and whatever, my mother would read me Winnie the Pooh to the point where I now can go into a classroom and take Winnie the Pooh, and I'd have a child. I said, I'm going to thumb through the book and tell me where to stop. And they would say, okay, stop. I opened the book and find the beginning of that story. I'd read them the very first paragraph, and then I'd close the book and finish the story. That's how well I know Pooh Bear. And so, of course, you got to give credit to the authors of stories. You can't just tell somebody else's stories without giving them credit, because they have done the authorship of it. So because of that, I have, with my own personal stories, have created a repertoire of stories that are mine, as opposed to, that way I don't feel like I'm infringing on somebody else's work unless I specifically say, this is come A.E. Milner. I do Sir Gawain the Green Knight, and I tell them I base it on J.R.R. Tolkien's translation from the original Anglo-Saxon. I let somebody know where I'm getting my stories. Now, ghost stories are something else. These are all true things that have happened to me in this area. You can take that for what it's worth.
I was going to ask if the stories that are told at performance are often, personal, true life stories or fiction, but it sounds like it's kind of a combination of all of those things.
Storytelling is, the technical term is the oral tradition. It is the oldest form of entertainment that is in existence. It's been around since, the guy first sat around the campfire and told stories. We think about Greek mythology, and Apollo is the sun chariot and all this stuff. These were all stories to explain how things or why things happen. And in it, there was, like Aesop's fables, have a little bit of a moral to it. But I mean, to hear a story, you don't have a picture put in front of you. The picture is here. And if I might say a coffee cup, you might see this, where somebody else might see a very fine piece of china, or somebody else might see a piece of throwaway paper. All I'm saying is coffee cup, and your imagination takes over. And that's what I like about storytelling. It allows the listener's imagination. Now, I might give some adjectives, something to shape it a little bit. I might say a tall or short, fat, skinny, whatever, but I still let the listener's imagination take over. And I think that's one of the beauties of storytelling.
Now, see, what you just described, I never really thought about. So really, in the sense of storytelling, as you're talking, it is a relationship. It's dependent upon not only the storyteller, but the listeners as well.
It is imperative that you have a live audience. Because don't take me wrong, sit there and talk to a camera is one thing, but I can look and see that you haven't fallen asleep yet. That's good. That tells me you're listening at least. I taught 8th grade for 12 years, and I always say I taught 8th grade hormones, and then I slash that and say no, history. Because most adults remember the 8th grade year with either horror and trepidation or joy. And so they immediately have their own images of 8th grade, and they know what I'm going through. But I would use story in the 8th grade, just like Terrell Shaw has used stories in his class to hook a child into the event. And once you've got them hooked, then you don't have to worry about teaching. They're going to learn on their own.
I can
And
tell
that's
you,
what story does.
I can tell you one of my favorite classes in high school was simply because of that. Mr. William Perry, mythology. I would love to listen to the mythology. So when I had him, I don't even know what literature or what it was, but he would sit at his desk and he would tell these mythology stories and mythological stories, and I was just enthralled by them. And I just loved the class. And even to this day, I still find myself drawn to mythology because of that, because it was just so his way of telling the story versus, we would read some of them, then he would tell some of them, and you just couldn't wait for the day that he was actually telling the story.
Yes.
And the class would be full.
It makes a difference.
Yeah,
it makes a
big
difference. Mr. Birch in my high school would do the same thing. You start talking about the Battle of Actium, and the next thing you know, he was talking about how the triremes looked and how the Roman soldiers lined up and how Cleopatra's barge, and you're sitting there and these images are going through your mind, and you felt like, well, that guy was there. I mean, he's got you hooked. Now, Mr. Somerville, who taught me American history, he added story but added puns. And if we didn't moan and groan at the right point, he knew he had lost us. And so, I mean, both of them were instrumental in getting me interested in both storytelling and history. And then people like I said, Jane, Maryland Kirk, who tells stories from Puerto Rico, and Gary Green, who tells Cherokee stories about here. If you remember Debbie Brown, she used to tell a story called Spearfinger. And Debbie Brown was a little tiny girl, and she could terrify 8th grade boys with that Spearfinger story. I mean, it's just that little creaky voice of hers and that hair looked like she'd been playing with a light socket. And I mean, you were sitting there just going, and then when she plucked out this fake finger on it and talked about taking the liver out, and it was like the kids would jump and scream. I miss her, but I mean, she was a great teller. She was a great teller.
Well, after our break, I think you're going to share a story with us.
Yes, sir.
And there is an opportunity pretty soon for folks to hear the Ridge and Valley Tellers.
We actually have an event over at Schroeder's on the 31st of July from 7 to 9, and we've got 8 tellers coming.
Yeah.
We're gonna, each teller's got about 10 minutes, and it's gonna be Bill Baker, Michael Burton, Jane Cunningham, Ken Freshour, Gary Green, Terrell Shaw, and myself. And we're trying to do several things this year. Terrell Shaw won the Big Fibbers contest last year.
Yeah.
And we will be doing that again this year on April 1st. And then we're hoping to do a November Telebrations. And we're actually meeting with Lisa Smith this week to talk about Ghost Walk and on Broad Street, which I've been involved with since its conception. So we're trying to help.
I know the event coming up on the 31st of July is part of the Poetry Night series.
Exactly.
It's not technically poetry, but it's in the same
genre.
Yeah. And the Poetry Night series is now 25 years old, something like that. It's one.
Did you start it?
Kinda. I haven't kept up with it the whole time, but
He's been the inspiration.
Inspiration.
yeah. But it's at the courtyard at Schroeder's, and those evenings are really a lot of fun. So I'm thrilled that y'all are going to do one of those this month, and I'm
We're looking
hoping it'll
forward
be
to
an annual thing.
We would like it to become an annual thing. In fact, we'd like it to become more often than that. There are, and it's not the 8 of us. There are people in this town. I mean, you talked about him being a storyteller, and he said, I'm not really sure. But there are people who tell stories. My dad, my grandmother, they were fantastic storytellers. They're just people who have that gift.
Well, we're coming up on our break. When we come back, Mr. Harris will entertain us with a story. So don't go away. We'll be right back.
Packers. Vikings. Packers. Vikings.
Viking.
Red state. Blue state. Vegan.
Carnivore.
We come from different places.
Uptown.
Downtown.
Optimist.
We come to different conclusions.
Half empty.
Half full.
But when we live united, we create real, lasting change in the building blocks of life. The education, income, and health of our communities,
Live
our families,
united.
even the person next to us.
Live united.
Real change won't happen without you. So give, advocate, volunteer, live united. Sign up at liveunited.org.
And that's a sad thing to me, a sad connotation.
Welcome back to Community Watch. We've been talking with Bob Harris, who is a storyteller, part of the Ridge and Valley Storytelling Group that has a group performance as part of the Poetry Night series at Schroeder's on July 31st.
Correct.
At 7 o'clock. You have agreed to share a story with us.
Yes.
Well,
And the story is called Pete. This story begins where a lot of stories end. It's a hospital room. It's very stark and white. About the only color in it all is drawings taped around the window of strange looking animals and plants. The bed is almost flat, except toward the pillow there's a small bump where the child is laying. The mother is sitting on the edge of the bed, and she looks up at the doctor, and the doctor shakes his head so slowly and so minutely, Pete doesn't see it. Pete turns to his mom and said, "Mom, are you sure heaven goes on forever?" And she said, "Yes, I am." And she leaned over to kiss him, but he never felt her lips. Now, Pete had been in heaven for a while. Time is not really recorded there too well. He had met some of his ancestors, although he really didn't know who they were, and they greeted him, but he really didn't know what to say to them. He didn't know that much about history, so meeting people like Washington didn't really faze him. And after a while, he basically kind of wandered off. He had wandered over hills and valleys, and he had finally come to this edge. And beyond it, it was just dark. And there he was dangling his feet, twiddling his thumbs, when God walked up. God looked at him and said, "Pete, are you all right?" And Pete turned around and said, "Yes, your lordship, I'm just fine." And God said, "Well, you just call me God. You don't have to worry about lordship. Are you sure you're okay?" Pete thought for a minute and said, "Well, I had some questions. I probably have the answers. What is it you want to know?" He said, "Well, am I ever going to see Mom and Dad again?" "What? Yeah, you'll see them. I'm pretty positive you'll see them, but it's all in God's good time. Trust me." "Okay. God, Mom said I'd be all healed when I got up here. I still got my limp." "Yeah. Have you tried walking without it?" "What are you No, you don't say that to God," he thought. No, sir, I haven't." "Get up and try walking." So Pete got up, took a couple of steps, and he kept limping. God said, "Think about walking without the limp." So he had to think about it, and after a few minutes, he was walking perfectly normal. And he walked around, and then when he came back and he started talking to God, he started limping again. He said, "God, it's back. Does it hurt?" "No, it doesn't hurt. It's just kind of the way I walk." God said, "Well, have you ever thought that that's part of you, Pete? That's something that your mother would recognize if she saw you?" "What? I thought I would lose the limp." "What does your grandmother look like?" "Well, she's got gray hair and glasses." "Do you think she wants gray hair and glasses when she gets here?" Well, she wouldn't be my nanny if she didn't have the gray hair and glasses. She's probably going to have the gray hair and glasses when she gets here. Just like you can have that limp. Or not. The decision's up to you. He thought for a moment. I'll have to think about that. You got all the time in heaven you want, Pete. Any other questions? Yes. That. God looked at what Pete was pouring at, which was just nothing. And God said, what's the problem? He said, Mother said God made heaven so it goes on forever. There's nothing there. It's stopped. It's just, have you walked out there? Are you No, I don't say that to God. You don't ask him if he's crazy. It's not a good thing. Try walking out there. Oh, I don't know about that, God. Trust me. Okay. So Pete took a step out, and it kind of turned white under his feet. And then it kind of turned green and grass. He took a few more steps, and it turned white, then green, then grass. And he made a big circle, and when he did, it all filled up. He came back and, see, Pete, as heaven grows, as more people get here, it grows and grows. This heaven goes on forever. And Pete was sitting there going, this is amazing. About that time, Pete noticed that some angels flying toward him. He said, God, there's an angel coming. God didn't turn around. He says, has he got a spear? Yeah, he's got a spear. He's got a notebook under his arm or something. He says, yeah, the paper's hanging all over. He says, that's Michael. He worries a lot. He's been with me since the beginning. He worries a lot. God, I've been looking all over heaven for you. Michael, what's the problem? You know what the day is? Well, of course you know what day it is. But you know what's happening today. Yes, Michael, I know what's happening today. Trust me. I trust you, Lord. But and he opens up the book, and all these names and records and all this stuff start flying all over the place. He's grabbing them, trying to put them all back together. Michael, you worry about man too much. I gave the man the right to make his own destiny. Man is good. Man is wise. He will do the right thing. Trust me. Now, I've got a little troubled soul here I'm working with. So you just calm down. You fly back to where the office is, and I'm going to talk to Pete a little longer. He closed the book and tucked it under his arm, grabbed the spear and said, are you sure? I'm positive. I trust man. He will be successful. And he walks off. Then God turns to Pete and said, Pete, on the other side of this galaxy, I've got a new planet I'm working on. I need some help of what's going to live there and grow there. You want to help me? And Pete looked at him. Can I really? Oh, yeah. I'm always looking for new ideas. And so God and Pete, hand in hand, walked off, and heaven followed him. Pete, original story of mine.
That was great.
Let's see, we were both sitting there like children.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask, at least for you, how long do you keep a story in your rotation of stories? Are you constantly looking for new stories? Or?
I'm constantly working on new stories. What I try to do is write the story. Therefore, I can kind of go back to it and tweak it and work on it. A good storyteller doesn't just tell a little anecdote. He works on the story, and he manipulates the story, and he works on the dialogue, he works on the descriptions, so that he becomes part of the story, and our story becomes part of them. Mm-hmm. And so they're comfortable with it. The best ghost story I've ever told is the difference between graveyards and cemeteries. And people have heard me tell that story, have questioned the reality of it. How true is this story that I tell about the graveyard behind Applebee's? And there's enough meat in there that they really wonder, is it real? And I have to say, in all honesty, everyone I tell, every ghost story I've ever told, have been real stories.
Yeah, real stories.
Now, an 8th grade looks at you and they immediately swap out the word real for true.
Well, so much of, and the story that you told us is certainly a good example, but so much of the power of the story is in the telling.
Correct.
I'm sure written out that the story would be a very sweet story, but it really takes on life in the telling of the story.
I write the story so I remember the things that hooked me into the concept to begin with. It's really from my own notes. When you ask about stories, I have a repertoire of ghost stories. Then I have a collection of historical stories. I told the story of the Great Locomotive Chase to I've told that to 8th graders, but I've told the same story to a group of retired lawyers and a Supreme Court judge. And the question, I end it with the question, who was the hero of the story? William Fuller or James Andrews? Now, to find out why I asked that question, you have to hear the story. And it takes about 20 minutes to tell that story. But it's an interesting concept when you start looking at what that one single day, on April 12th of 1862, if one or two things had been different, the thousands of lives would have been changed. But that's, then I have a group of stories of things that happened to me growing up with hemophilia, trips to the hospital. I can tell you stories of doctors here in Rome that many of them are now gone. Sad to say, they were great people. Emergency room nurses that were astounding at how hard they worked to keep people alive and well. And then I have stories like Pete that are just stories that came out of my heart that I've enjoyed over the years. So these are all in my repertoire, and it depends on where I'm going and what group I'm telling as to what I pull from.
Well, if your storytelling is any indication, folks that go to Schroeder's on the 31st of July are in for a treat. We're coming up on our next break. When we come back, we'll give you the particulars of that event coming up, so stay with us. We'll be right back.
If you're looking for a new pet that your family will cherish every day, consider adopting from a shelter. Shelters are the best places to find a new pet. That's where you'll discover healthy, loyal, and loving animals, eager to become a part of your family. A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet, so bring home your new buddy today. To find out more, visit theshelterpetproject.org.
Like as we were meeting with Lisa, we'd like to get Telebration started.
Welcome
again.
back to Community Watch, and I want to thank Bob Harris for being with us today as a representative of the Ridge and Valley Tellers. They will be at Schroeder's on July 31st at 7 p.m. If you want to hear more stories and get some information about that group, you need to be at Schroeder's on Broad Street, Schroeder's downtown, on the 31st at 7 p.m. That's a Thursday. Thank you for being with us, and we'll see you next time on Community Watch.